Hello, everyone. This is your friend Abraham. I say friends because that's who I want to talk to. My friends uh, on my Facebook, and I might put it up on YouTube. But if you're on my Facebook, I know this is I post everything publicly, but I'm mostly talking to my friends because if you're on my Facebook, you know me in some way. We may not know each other well. I know some of you better than others, but I do know you in some way. And there was actually something that had been on my mind earlier today. And I was gonna, like I said, I was just gonna write like uh, just a food for thought post. And then I was on Twitter, and I saw that Charlie Kirk, had been fatally shot and killed. And like most circumstances, I usually try to wait and see how people react. Um, I'm not someone who doesn't have opinions. I obviously have them, and I share them. And sometimes people are upset with them. But I like to observe how my friends react, because I have friends of multiplicities of opinions on different issues. Um, I have friends who are extremely religious, and I have friends who are extremely secular. Some would even claim to be atheist. I have friends who are radically right wing, and I have friends who are radically left wing. And I had been thinking about this idea of when news breaks, right? Now there's some things that occasionally will happen, and we'll pretty much all agree, like the lady at the Phillies game that took the kid's ball, right? Like political boundaries fell down, religious boundaries fell down. We all realized, yeah, that was a pretty horrible thing for that lady to do, right? But then something happens where something happens to a particular group, right? Something happens to a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or happens to a person of color, or happens to a Christian, or happens to a Muslim, or happens to a Jew, or, many different things. Or someone of said group does something. And one of the reasons I usually sit back and just observe, is because I'm always interested to see how we all react, how we all tend to decide how we're going to feel. Our amount of outrage that we have over the loss or tragedy toward a human life is often based on our political, religious belief system. And it is almost without exception. It is very rare, that someone who is politically known, or a person of a certain class or group, will bring us all together in agreement that something is wrong. Even when we agree that what happened was wrong, there's always a passive aggressiveness of trying to get our political or religious swing into it. And then, of course, there are also those who are just happy and about the tragedy that happened. And every time I see it, it bothers me. Because yes, if you were to ask me what I believe, I'm an independent Baptist Christian. All right, I am a I would be what you call probably a conservative Republican. That's my political affiliation. But I mean, there are some things that I have differing opinions on. There are many times when I've disagreed with the Republican Party and President Trump and stuff like that. But I would say on most issues that I lean toward that area, right? And so now most of you that I've met usually don't know those things about me when you first meet me. You just know me as the guy that cut your hair, or the guy that has the newspaper, or whatever, right? And then later you find out. And because of that, we find ourselves either arguing or something of that nature. And the reason why it bothers me is because, again, when it involves a human life, whether it's someone who has been killed or someone whose life has been greatly destroyed or whatever, there is always this need. It's almost an insatiable need to go into our corners, find out what our leaders tell us, and then we act accordingly. I can think of different things that have happened over the past few years, and it amazes me to see the differing selective outrage that comes from my friends. This is not me defending conservatism and saying that the left are the intolerable ones, and this is not me saying the left are the right ones and I'm defending them, and that and that they're the right ones. No. We are all messed up to an extent. If you're a friend of mine and you're saying that's not me, maybe I'm not talking about you. But there is definitely a problem. Because we will decide if that person is of the LGBTQ plus community. We will have a certain feeling about them losing their life or their life being hurt. If that person is white, we will have an opinion. If that person is conservative, we will have an opinion, right? So, for example, when something happens in a blue state, instead of talking about how sad we are and expressing our, concern for those who are going through the tragedy, we want to talk about Gavin Newsom. We want to talk about Donald Trump. We want to talk about what the left is doing or how this is the conservatives' fault. And I understand that there's time and a place for political discussion after the fact. Very often that's immediately where we go. One that really kind of hit me hard, not because I knew the guy or that I even cared about him, in the sense that, he was a friend of mine or anything, was the assassination of the healthcare CEO. Louis Mangione shot him in cold blood. And there were people celebrating it. Friends of mine that I have on my Facebook, that I still have as friends on my Facebook, who were celebrating it because he was rich. And I remember unfortunately, a lot of the people that have been dying and tragically been getting killed recently have been conservative. So I have to kind of go back a lot of times to really think about it. But, even if you look at the situation in Israel and Palestine, right? There are people who will be upset about Jewish deaths and will not be upset about Palestinian deaths. There are friends of mine who will be upset about the Palestinian deaths and will not be upset about the Jewish deaths. There will be people who hate Russians and love the Ukrainians. There will be people who will celebrate, one over another. I remember back when Donald Trump had his assassination attempt. Now, a lot of my leftist friends at first were pretty quiet. And that immediately turned into passive aggression. Oh, well, where's our outrage for children in schools? Well, there is outrage. There is outrage. Again, differing opinions on that, but I don't celebrate, nor do I excuse the death of children in a school. But I also don't excuse the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And then, of course, eventually everybody went crazy, and then there were those who were saying it was a setup, and he planned the whole thing and stuff like that. There are those who, celebrate Donald Trump owning Zelensky and stuff like that. And of course, this wasn't a death or anything, but it's like, well, Zelensky has to go back to his country, and he has to deal with them. And these are human lives we're dealing with here. It's not theater. This isn't a game. And we pick a side and we decide how we want to be outraged. Then there was the example of the girl on the train, I think it was, subway or something like that. And again, some decided to be outraged. Some decided not to be outraged. And then today, Charlie Kirk, murdered, assassinated. And, of course, those of my friends who are on the right, as myself, are greatly disturbed and saddened, shocked by the death of Charlie Kirk. I didn't know him. I met him once. He and I believe it was Candace Owens and a couple other people from Turning Point came to IUP. And I got to meet him, shook his hand, said hello. And that was it, So I didn't know him, but it still bothered me. And then I see friends coming on and saying, oh, I'm against, well, yeah, I'm not celebrating his death because I want gun reform, right? Right? Or we'll go back and say, well, I'm not against I'm certainly upset about the death of George Floyd, but he should be in prison anyway. We got to get rid of the drug. And we always go after these things. And there's always we're sad, but. Yeah, we're sad, but. No, you're not. Or maybe I shouldn't judge so fast, I guess. But that's how I want to feel about it. Because there is this decision. Call it whatever you want. Blame whatever you want. The truth of the matter is there's something wrong in the hearts of people when we will not have sadness or empathy for when a life is destroyed or lost. Now, I did hear the statement, had Charlie Kirk not been spewing hatred and homophobia and racism, that he probably wouldn't have been shot. Which is crazy, because there's another statement I've heard. If she wouldn't have been wearing that particular article of clothing, maybe she wouldn't have been assaulted. Now, both of those statements are absolutely disgusting. But one group of people will accept it, and another group will be outraged by it. Can't we just be outraged or upset or saddened, broken by the fact that somebody's life was ended? When a woman is assaulted, can't we be upset that her life was ruined by someone who assaulted her. I don't want to use the word. Why can't we be saddened? I want to, again, I'm talking to my friends right now. And if you've lasted this long, 15 minutes, this is a long talk. Ask yourself a question, whether you're conservative or liberal, leftist. If you're on the left, why did the death of Charlie Kirk automatically make you want to go into politics? If you're on the right, why did the death of Charlie Kirk automatically want you to go into politics? I'm not trying to judge everybody here. I understand all of us act differently when things happen. But if the thought of a father, and we can go back to the CEO situation, right? The thought of a father and husband being murdered in cold blood. They don't have to be a father or son, father or husband. They can be just a random person. Somebody that somebody will no longer get to see anymore has died. And now that family will now see your passive-aggressive and or cheerful response to the death of that loved one. Why? Why do you have selective outrage? Why do I have selective outrage? Now, again, I try to not be that way. I try to be balanced. I try to be equal, I guess. Because at the end of the day, regardless of whether regardless of their sexual preferences or gender identity or their religious affiliation or their political feelings, they are human beings. The friends that I'm interacting with on the other side of the screen are real human beings. They have families, they have friends, and it's like, well, I would be upset, but you see, I'm not, because they didn't believe in human rights. And yet you're okay because they lost the right to life. I'm not saying this as a means of saying, like, oh, this is whatever, but I believe we need to stop and think, why do we have selective outrage? Why are we upset when one person or one group is hurt and not when another is? Because if we are only stirred by whatever group they're with, that's not true human empathy. That is tribalism. Plain and simple. That's all it is. If you cannot be empathetic toward your enemy, if you want to call it that, then there's seriously something wrong with you, and you need to examine your heart. So that's all I have to say. I want you all to know that if you're my friend, I love you. I don't know, maybe that's not the right term, but I care about you. And I hope we can continue to be friends. And I don't want something as trivial as differences in opinion to make it not so. Thank you for watching.